It was an early morning in May of 1857 when the steamboat Franklin Steel took off from a dock in Mankato and started going upstream slowly. And you could only do this in the spring on the Minnesota River, and heading up to the new town of New Ulm. On board were about 70 passengers who were coming up from Cincinnati to settle in this new town, which was only a few years old at the time. Adolf Sider, who lived here, when he arrived on the ship as a young boy, said we could not see any houses until we arrived on Minnesota and 3rd South Street. And there we saw a medium-sized frame house. And then we saw a few small scattered log cabins and one large and several small shanties to house the newcomers. On board was Catherine Fowl Fender. She was coming along. She's in her mid-20s. She has 2 children, and she is following her husband, Wilhelm, out to New Ulm. In the book Memories Trail, it describes the arrival. She says, "Husband, my husband, what have you done to us? Where have you brought us to? It's all so different from what we expected. Where is the town?" There we go. And there's Catherine and young Wilhelm. One thing in doing the research and writing this is to remember that these were young people in their 20s and early 30s. We see pictures so often of them as the old honored people, but these were people younger than most people in this room, going off in a short journey that became a long journey. The reason it happened is because when she asked, where is the town of New Ulm in the spring of 1857 was mostly an idea. It was a dream. And that's what makes New Ulm special, and why I have continued to come back here and work on the history of the town for now something like 27 years. Because this is a town that was formulated as more or less a utopia for Turners. This is going to be the place where you could live the Turner dream. In 1855, Wilhelm Turner wrote to the National Turner newspaper, the Die Zeitung. And in it, he puts in a column calling for a town of practical Turnerism. And that's what this town is. So today I'm going to look a little bit about the philosophy, first of all, of what they were looking for when they formed this town. And then we'll look at see how it worked out in reality. The Greek historian Thucydides said at one point, history is philosophy with examples. New Ulm, the history of New Ulm is a philosophy in many ways. And today we're going to be looking at the examples a little bit. Maybe the story of New Ulm started back at the Battle of Jena in 1806, when Napoleon basically conquered German forces. And remember, Germany at this time was not a country. It was something like 31 different principalities and states, Prussia being the largest of them, but numerous little states all broken up. And when he came in, the Holy Roman Empire, which had been a loose affiliation for hundreds of years, broke up. Napoleon starts to institute his form of government. The leaders at the top begin speaking French, and there is a concern among the people of Germany who are living there in these principalities and duchies and states that we're going to lose who we are to this, the worst thing to a French guy. And so it created a reaction among the common people. One of the people who stepped forward was Friedrich Jahn. He was a teacher taught at a gymnasium or a high school beginning in 1808. And then in 1811, he opens up this great Turnplatz in Berlin. His philosophy that he's preaching is that you need to have a sound mind and a sound body if we are ever going to take back Germany or Prussia, Berlin, all these places, without a young people who are physically active, physically in shape, and mentally alert. So the good thing that he could pull off was that it was sort of non-confrontational. We're just going to go exercise. And so it wasn't cracked down on. Jan becomes known as more or less the father of gymnastics. And Turner is basically a gymnast. That's what it means for the German. And he invents everything or introduces everything from the horse, and at that time they put a little tail on the horse. The rings, the high bar, a form of the balance beam. So what we think of as gymnastics today basically was all brought together at that Turnplatz in Berlin by Friedrich Jan. But he had a different side to him too, and he realized that you needed to have not just physical ability, but a sound mind. He would have lectures, but he also realized that there was a symbolic nature to being a German. He believed that there were two Germans. There was the German states, the government, that maybe Napoleon conquered. But there was also the Germany of the heart, of the culture, of the language that needed to be preserved. And so he pushed that should become a part of what he would call Germanness. Or here, the book he wrote in 1810, the Deutsches Volkstum, so the people. On this journey, he met the Grimm brothers, the brothers Grimm, who again were collecting stories about Germany and bringing them together. And Wilhelm Grimm writes to his brother and says, Jan knows the ways of the people well and is familiar with many legends and enjoys our tales very much. And he mentions that Jan was in fact planning a trip throughout Germany to collect stories, legends, and folk tales. So it is not surprising that one of the Turner's most popular characters from German history was Mr. Hermann. It was a symbol of standing up to a foreign invader. But Jan's message basically, again, was a sound mind and a sound body, as a phrase that came from a Roman writer, Juvenal. In fact, it's been around for thousands of years. What happens, though, is Napoleon is defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, and by 1815, he is moved back across the Rhine completely. And of course, then the Battle of Waterloo, he's out of power. The German states, those old principalities and duchies and kingdoms, all start coming back and going, well, what are we going to be right now? And you had all these young men who have been training and exercising and working to overthrow Napoleon. And so they grab onto another great German hero. And they have in 1817, they all gather at Wartburg, which was known as the place where Martin Luther retreated after the Diet of Worms, and he was put in productive custody. So there is, in fact, a painting in the Rathskeller of Wartburg. See if you can pick it out the next time you're there. So these young student groups, some were Turners, but there's a whole number of them called the Burschenschafter. And they meet there, they have rallies, they have speeches, politics. And then afterwards, Jan organizes a book burning of books that are reactionary, some French objects in literature, but the people who he thinks are fairly conservative. And he is pushing for a constitution, a united Germany, elections, for example. And so Jan becomes a bit of a threat. And then in 1819, one of his young followers, Carl Sand, assassinates a very conservative writer, newspaper man, and it suddenly throws off the German leadership, the conservative leadership, and they say, we have to step in and quiet this down. And so, led by Chancellor Metternich from Austria, a number of the German states get together in Carlsbad, Austria, and adopt a set of Carlsbad decrees, they're called in history, in 1819. And among other things, it bans these fraternities or these men's clubs, the Burschenschaft. It removes liberal university professors, and it expands censorship of the press. Friedrich Jahn is arrested and held in prison for 2 years. When he is freed, they say you cannot live in a town with a university. So in effect, the Turner movement is ended in 1819, more or less throughout all the German states. Jahn fades into the background and in fact never becomes a great leader again, although he was offered a professorship at Harvard in 1828. 1840, new king in Prussia, Friedrich Wilhelm IV takes over, and he's younger, he's a little more liberal. So in the 1840s, you start getting a resurgence of Turnerism, and it's slightly different. Not only is it the exercise, but they have Turners who are joining who never do gymnastics. They go off to political rallies. They love to sing. They have songbooks. Many of these are this new generation in Germany in 1840 who you're having a developing middle class. So you have people who are shopkeepers, craftsmen, moderately wealthy, well educated. The literacy rates in these areas was incredible compared to the rest of Europe. So you have this young generation, and suddenly you have this resurgence of the Turners. They loved to do their exercise, wrestling out in the fields. They loved to walk. They had long walks in the woods, a great tradition that they had. 1847, the basis for the song "The Happy Wanderer" is written, the poem, Mein Vater ist ein Wanderer. So, and then they began holding these the first large nationwide Turner meeting at this point was in Heilbronn. Heilbronn, so this is only 1845, figure out on this calendar. 1845, the first Turner clubs are being reorganized in Germany, Heilbronn being one of the strongest, and one of the key founders was William Fender, young man at this point. And shortly after that, he moves off to Ulm, and there he organizes another Turnverein. So here he is, this man in his 20s at this point still, and he's organized 2 Turnvereins. Well, this starts developing into a political move, and what happens, there's a number of causes for the German Revolution of 1848, but part of it is the economy takes a downturn. You have this larger middle class, much better communication, railroads throughout Europe and all of that. Think of the type of, Les Mis, right? So they're all singing up there, "Won't you join us?" On the barricades in Berlin in this case. And it spreads. And it's throughout Europe too. In February of 1848, the French king is overthrown in the first of these, the springtime of peoples, they called it, across Europe. In Czechoslovakia, Louis Kossuth comes up. In Italy, Garibaldi is coming up as a young leader. So it's across Europe. One of the key meetings when the success of the revolution seemed to be working was the Frankfurt Assembly, and they meet at St. Paul Kirche in Frankfurt, and there are the delegates walking in. On the left, in white, are the Turners. They had their own thing about themselves. They would like to wear white. They wore their hair longer. When they spoke to each other, they always used the informal "du" instead of "sie." We were brothers together. And again, they stood out. You knew who was a Turner. But then the conservative forces come back again and start suppressing the revolutions throughout the German states at that point. And it was particularly strong in Baden and Württemberg at this point. And the leaders come in, and of course they sweep away all those revolutionaries, right? And put them on the ships. You see them, where are they headed? The United States. This is a map from 1853. The ships coming out here from, let's see, Bremen and Hamburg and this area. They're coming, and they come basically to New York, to Boston, New York City, to Philadelphia, and to Baltimore. And then from there, they can travel west on the growing road and canal and rail systems. So the bulk of Turner groups that you'll find are Germans, immigrants at this point, are heading to northern cities. There is, quite interesting, you could take a ship down around Florida and go to New Orleans. And in New Orleans, in fact, did have a very strong Turnverein. And from there, they would head out to what would have been their wilderness. It's been like our Minnesota to Texas. And of course, there is this whole German element around Fredericksburg, Texas. It's still there. Well, William Fender already had taken off even before the Great Revolutions of 1848. In March, he has decided he wants to go to the United States and settle. Takes a ship. He stops in Berlin to visit his brother Karl. Karl there is working on writing books and newspapers with his two associates, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And then Wilhelm heads off, stops in New York, but basically goes up very quickly to Cincinnati. Cincinnati was a great, great city at that point. They called it the Queen City of the West. And when he arrives, it had already had a German element, but that group of 1948 refugees who had been booted or discouraged or encouraged to move from Germany to German states are coming to Cincinnati. Isabella Bird described these newcomers, these Germans. She was an English woman who was traveling across America, and she wrote, "The Germans are thinking, skeptical, theorizing people. In politics, socialist. In religion, atheist. They have succeeded in practically abolishing the Sabbath. Skilled, educated, and intellectual, they are daily increasing in numbers, wealth, and political importance, and constitute an influence of which the Germans, the Americans themselves, are afraid." In the fall of late summer actually, of 1848, one of the great heroes of the revolution who had fled Germany, Friedrich Hecker, he would have been on the lips of every German at that point, comes to Cincinnati. He meets with Fender and some of his friends, and they organize the first Turnverein in the United States in 1848. So when you think Fender helped found the first ones in Heilbronn and then in Ulm, first one in 1845. 3 years later, he's off in Cincinnati forming his third Turnverein. This was really a part of who he was. He moves across the river to Newport, Kentucky shortly after that, and he organizes another Turnverein in Kentucky. So this is this guy who's just turning 30, who's organized 4 Turner Halls across the country as this young man within a short time. He becomes the head of gymnastics program in Cincinnati, and then later across the river over in Newport, he is also the Turnfort, they call it, which is sort of the gymnastics instructor. This is a picture from 1850 of the Turners in Cincinnati. And of course, they're wearing their white. They love that. Can you see well enough to see what they like to do? Well, they do a lot of drinking. Yeah, okay. So much for high philosophy, right? And they have some rifles. They have their shoots of a variety. They would like to go out and shoot. They love their musical instruments. They love to sing and play music together. And you see a few of those. And some exercise. They have a few wands and such there. Do you see this guy over here hanging from the tree? Right there, that guy. Keep an eye on him. This is his membership card in the Cincinnati Turnpike. Come on, Franz Erd. Mr. Erd comes to New Ulm and opens up a store down on Minnesota Street. And I love this is, I mean, again, this is their culture. He's lifting weights, he's jumping on the pommel horse, and again, they are showing their admiration of the German states and of the United States. In 1851, they hold their first national Turnfest. By this time, there were at least 7 throughout the United States. Just a few years later, Philadelphia, New York, Louisville, St. Louis, and these large, huge competitions. And they included not just physical competitions, but mental gymnastics as well. You would have to give speeches and be judged on your declamation and your writing. But there were concerns about those Germans, and the Irish, of course, too. All this wave, and of course this is when the Irish immigration is taking place too. And so there is this strong political reaction that they're going to be running off with the ballot box. Now it's a little simple, but basically you have to be in the United States for 5 years and you could become an American citizen. So the reaction is a political party develops called the American Party. It's most commonly known as the Know Nothing Party because you would come up and you'd say, well, tell me about your political party. You'd say, I know nothing. And it was rabidly anti-immigrant. One of their platforms was that for an immigrant, for a foreigner to vote, you had to be a citizen for 21 years before you could vote or even hold a political office. And this became a powerful political force in the United States. What's happening is the Whig Party is falling apart over debates about slavery. And so there's this opening maybe that you could unite the North and South to go against immigrants, is basically what it was. It stepped beyond that. Throughout northern cities in 1855, 1856, there were riots and battles in the streets. Chicago, the Chicago lager beer fight, when they tried to shut down, the German troops tried to shut down the German saloons on Sundays. They were violating the law. Cincinnati, again, armed conflicts with our Turners that would flee out here later, on the streets with these mobs. Louisville, a whole neighborhood was burned down. St. Louis, Columbus, Cleveland. This is a picture of, in 1857, of election day, and a mob attacked the Irish and Germans who were trying to vote. And President Buchanan calls out the Marines to allow them to get to the polling places. Now we get to the story of New Ulm. These mobs are attacking the parties politically. There seems to be a strong movement for temperance, and the Germans are finding themselves a target. And so Fender says, and some people are saying, well, let's just train everybody to take up arms. And we have Turner rifles in the collection here. And their reason for them was not just for shooting targets. It was in case they needed to defend themselves. Wilhelm Fender says, let's go create a colony out on the frontier somewhere. And in that town, it's going to be the life of practical Turnerism. In May of 1855, he comes out, he develops an organization in Cincinnati, a Turner Colonization Society. In 1855, he takes it to the National Convention of the Turners. The National Convention debates it back and forth. Are we going to support this colonization movement? Some opposed it, including this prominent revolutionary from Germany, Franz Siegel. And he says the New York delegation opposes supporting the Colonization Society. But the vote ended up passing. And being gracious people out here in Brown County, we named a township after him. Well, they begin, I'm not going to get into the full details of, they send out a search party, they come here, and they meet up with the Chicago group, which is here, and the Cincinnati group has good money. They have about 1,300 members. The Chicago Society, which is here first under Vinehorn, has about 200. And Chicago is a nice sort of neighborhood group of Germans who are coming up here. Cincinnati had this wonderful culture and this whole broad German, half the people in Cincinnati at that point, I believe, were German. So they bring in dollars. And it's really important because in 1857, there's a Great Depression in the United States. And I have a feeling the Chicago group left alone would have faced incredible financial hardships. And I don't know what would have happened, whether New Ulm would have ended up anywhere near like it has now. So now we have the stage set for practical Turnerism. What is the philosophy that they thought they were founding this town on? And it's one of the few towns you will find in the United States with a mission statement. To offer its members, aside from the basis of a secure existence, get away from the attacks, the benefits of a comprehensive, splendid youth education, and in general to concern itself with the promotion of trade and industry, the arts and sciences, and at the same time foster good German fellowship and the right spirit. Education, they were basically agnostic, atheist. So you want to put your money into education, believe in trade and industry, the arts and sciences, and a little Gemütlichkeit. And one of the in there they say the purpose is to provide liberty, culture, and well-being for all. The New Ulm Pioneer, in their very first issues, the first newspaper ever published in town, said this: the epithet New Ulm not only does not change, but shapes the meaning of the noun pioneer in our name. It says that the whole population of this city is in the pioneer service of humanitarianism. Isn't that great that your town was founded on humanitarianism? We all pay homage to socialism, not that systematic one which dictates from above and abolishes individuality, but to the just and beneficial, organically evolving, appropriate to the particularity of the circumstances. We are especially against poverty, spiritual as well as physical. Now, there are other reasons for it. You can go into humanitarianism, but they also, as they wrote in the Settlement Society, is they wanted to get away from the temperance movement because everybody tried to shut down their places on Sundays, and these Germans liked to party on Sundays. And Sunday laws, the blue laws, and you can't drink and party on Sundays. So we're going to go out to Minnesota, the very edge of the wilderness, to get away from you all. And this was really interesting. Again, in the first newspaper published in New Ulm, all people are born equal and endowed with inalienable rights, which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This sentence of the Declaration of Independence is forgotten and lost. You see the twist, by the way, here? Endowed by your Creator? No. You were born with your concept of liberty and freedom to enjoy yourself. So how does this play out? The Turners arrive. One Turner, Christian Prignitz, is hired to finish off the plat that was begun by Christian Ludwig Meyer and not completed. He's a dedicated Turner. In the first Turnfest held here in town, he came in second with a speech about Thomas Paine. So this is a fellow imbued with that. The town plat shows that this is a Turner town. First of all, they laid it out. It's such a German town because everything's neat and orderly, straight streets, and huge plat. I visit other towns. I've worked in other towns in Minnesota, and it's always the original plat is fairly small. In New Ulm, 20th Street North, 20th Street South, and there was something like 5,900 lots that are all laid out, but all the same size. You know, you can go to another town and you can find the rich neighborhood, right? You don't see that really in the original plat. It's the people up on that hill there. Show. So what did they do? If you go to a New England town, on the town green, you'll find a church. Here, their place of worship was Turner Hall, the county courthouse, and the school. That's what the center of the Turner world was. And that is still a part of this town. They also believed in nature. You remember their walks in the woods? And so they gave money, they gave the property for North and South Turner parks. North and South parks, you can still see, these on the plats. They gave property, lots, at least 12 spots around town for schools because they believed in education. So they wanted to share, and an important part of it too is, see all the blue outlines? Those are 4-acre garden plots. So their idea of socialism was you provide equal opportunity and you provide a way for people to support and feed themselves. So you could come in, get a plot of land for your house, and then you could have a garden plot. And of course, we remember that now with Garden Street, right? And who did they name their streets after? Not John Adams, that sort of tough New Englander, that New Englander might have been puritanical. They named it after Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine. Even if they misspelled Thomas Paine's last name. They did, by the way, every year they held Thomas Paine Day here in Frankfurt in the 19th century. So what is in fact a Turner town? Liberty, equality. The first Turnfest locally is held in September of 1857, and so they're already holding events here. They had organized a Turnverein in 1856 on November 11th, which we celebrate every year as Stiftungsfest. And then finally in 1858, they built the first Turner Hall. The architect was Julius Baird, who we know most of all as the architect, the father of the Herman Monument. And it opened officially on Weihnachtsabend in 1858. Christmas Eve. That seemed like a really Turner thing to do, with a dance, of course. You were going off for a midnight evening church service. Now this is really interesting because this is from the depredation claims after 1862. In 1862, that building that you saw burned down. It was burned on August 27th toward the end of the battles of New Ulm and the Dakota War. I'm not going to get into the details on that, but in 1862, in May, the German Land Association, the one who had come in and owned all the property and had distributed and sold the lots, broke up. This is the successors to the to the Chicago Land Company and the Cincinnati Group. And they say in that, they gave $400 to the Turnverein. When they broke up, by the way, this is when they gave land for parks, for public landings, schoolhouses, and the schools and everything in 1862. But in there, they also give $400 to the Turnverein for the purpose of improving Turner Hall that summer, and winter school can be held therein, in consideration of which the Turnverein shall obligate itself to permit the use of the hall for school purposes. So in 1862, you probably all have seen that older picture. They actually built in addition to it. Off, right? There we go. Off to the side here. And that is listed as for a school group. So if you walked into Turner Hall, you came in the entrance. This is where that entrance was that you saw in that picture earlier. And off to the side, they call it a sitting room, but they did have a bar. It's listed as in there. Then there's a large assembly hall and a huge stage because they loved their plays, their dramas. And this is an interior, again, this is done by parent, of what the interior was. Some nice work within there. They start building it in the summer of 1862, and then it gets burned down on August 27th. And they put in for government money to be reimbursed to build again. And what they get is Turner Hall with a roof. It has a stage, cellar, a bar, and down at the bottom, one frame privy outside. Inside, they list everything that was in so they could get reimbursed by the government for their losses. And they have Turner apparatus, horizontal poles and horizontal bars and some weights, and they had swords, so they loved to do fencing, was part of their teaching. They had a huge library. Julius Barrett was the librarian. And they had a wonderful array of books that were in there. There are some of the books that are up in the display upstairs. My favorite here I'm curious about, I have to look up, is what Babu's wine culture. I have no idea who Babu was or what they learned about wine from that. And then they had a long list of things for their stage performances, including a sultan suit, a pasha's suit, Turkish officer suits, a monk's suit, black frock coat, monarch's mantle, Spaniard's mantles, 2 fairy costumes. And they had 40 pieces, smaller pieces. They had books, and they described that they had plays that were printed, but then for the parts, they had to write them all out in hand for everybody. You could take it off to the copy machine for everybody to get a part. Carl Roos, who was sheriff in town, one of the leaders of the defense of New Ulm, said on that day he saw some of the Dakota, when they burned down Turner Hall, out wearing the stage costumes all around. So if you can picture the Dakota out there, their fairy costumes, and their Spaniards and such outfits. It started leading to a little retribution, and this is where things start getting interesting. This was written by Thomas Golden, who was the chaplain for the 25th Wisconsin Regiment. After the Dakota War, they're worried about further attacks, and so they send out this unit from Wisconsin. He's the reverend, the chaplain, and he's appalled by New Ulm, and he mentions, yes, it is this sink of iniquity where infidelity had thoroughly gone to seed was called New Ulm. He suggests that it was divine retribution a little bit on New Ulm to be burned, and mentions that, yes, that there are people buried in the streets, but the weakness of God has made them stronger because they held this. Is probably, I decided, in Gross's Hall, the Union Hall, which is now the Grand. They rebuilt in 1866. They started in 65. They've gotten money from the government. They rebuilt the new Turner Hall, and this is what it looked like. They're all out in their whites again, though. And then in 1872, they decided that they need some more space. And they built the addition, which is still there. It is the oldest Turner Hall in America in its original use. And it's truly amazing, and why I love being a part of that organization is that how many organizations of any sort still have their original purpose that they're carrying out after 150 years in their original site and original building. The primary driver for this, though, is that they have decided, the Turners basically, William Fender is the chair of the committee for the New Ulm Academy. They loved education. They felt that they needed to have a high school education because you could not go on to college. And that was the path that was developing after the Civil War. So they built this addition, which is still there. And it is a classic Turner building. On the main floor is a lecture room. They would hold their funeral services there. They would hold classes in there for the New Ulm Academy. And up above, he's still up there. Father Jan, his bust is still above the bar in that room in Turner Hall. Good Germans, they build a bar in the basement. You know, I often tell people, it's like, you have a lecture hall. The main floor also had what was the Donnenzimmer as the first library in town. And they also have a bar in the basement. So who combines a high school, a library, and a bar? Turners. They believe in education. So this is the full flowering of the dream of practical Turnerism. They have this beautiful building. They begin a kindergarten class. You know, that's a German word, right? And they hold the first kindergarten class. They have a Sunday school class on Sundays. It's so funny to read the church listings in the newspapers of those days, because they'll have the Lutherans, the Catholics, and then Turner Hall. That is a place for Sunday services. They would gather, they would go for nature walks, they would enjoy themselves immensely. They would hear lectures on Goethe and Schiller and practice their German language. And if you go up into the exhibit afterwards, there's a wonderful short interview that Harold Bierbaum did with Kurt Bell. And you really just have to listen to that to get a sense of what it was like to be a Turner. So they valued education. They also valued, in terms of the intellect, theater. And you'll just have to go back and talk to Dan Grebner about that. Or they also had parties, which of course is a Fasching or a masquerade ball over there on the other side. They believed in gymnastics, sound mind, sound body. And the going star, or the most biggest influence in gymnastics or in sports at that time for Germans, was Adolf Spies, who was German, wrote several books, and greatly influenced the direction of gymnastics. They called it German gymnastics, and this was opposed to English gymnastics, which tended to be very focused on certain strengths and team sports, like soccer and such, you know, the old English way. Spies believed in the whole body being exercised, being in good shape. And low impact was very important. So thoroughly modern. I hope we can bring some of this back. This is from 1860, and it's in a book of the Turnfest over here in this collection. And what are they doing? Pilates, right? Turner Pilates. I mean, I still go out and do those. And so what you'll see with their exercise, they loved low impact, but stretching, and the whole body. What they hated was football, by the way, because what's valued in football? You want this one guy, a couple guys, to be 300 pounds and run 10 yards, and that's it. Specialized. They didn't like having specialized skills. You want your whole body to be healthy. And they started bringing in girls. Were always a part of it, even from the 1840s. Women were part of exercise. And there's a wand, which is, there's a pair of Indian clubs up in the exhibit, and a few dumbbells. So that's the type of exercise they like. The men, there's dumbbells, again, a wand, the fellow nobles, the horse, and the high bar. They love group exercises, and where everybody would get together and do stretching and joint movement. And we're going to try to do this summer. Here's a picture of a New Ulm Turnfest, and another one from 1915 out here at Turner Hall in the backyard there. I learned from this, and in the line, there's a few that are a little slow, it looks like. It's like, didn't quite get the rhythm there. To bring this to the exciting conclusion, probably the epitome of what Wilhelm Turner envisioned and what these Turners envisioned when they created the town of New Ulm was Robert Nix. Nix was he was the dream, I think, of every Turner when they came out off of that boat in 1857. He was the son of Jacob Nix, who helped lead the defense of New Ulm in 1862. He was educated here in town. He was brilliant. He went off to the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. And then he went over to Berlin and Heidelberg to study physics and literature. By many accounts, he was one of the great experts in the United States on Plato and his writings. He wrote a wonderful little primer, German primer for first graders on how to learn German and grammar. After he graduates over in Germany, he comes back in 1883, and he is elected superintendent of schools. And he takes up the position, the challenge to lead the next generation of Turners from the founders. He is offered, as soon as he comes back, he's offered a position at Johns Hopkins University as a professor, and he turns it down. He says, I'm in New Ulm. What better place could I be to teach and bring up the next generation? He was a tremendous athlete, too, involved in Turnfests, teaching, and later on became president of the National Turners. So this is the star. This is what they had all hoped for. As superintendent of the high school, he pushed for a new public school building and to expand the high school offerings. And when he arrived in 1883, all through this time, there were classes still in Turner Hall. And the review, the New Ulm Review, says 3 rooms were occupied by classes in Turner Hall, numbering 108, 96, and 75 pupils. So this was the center of the school system. But the city was changing. After the Civil War, there's a large influx of German-speaking Bohemians. They tend to be more rural, peasant culture. They are not as well educated. These, the Turners were middle-class people who had all gone up to gymnasium at school. And they were generally Catholic. We know that. And then up on the hill, another group comes in of the Lutherans. And they're led by, in the 1880s, by Christian Albrecht, real star in the Lutheran Synod. Young guy in his 30s, and he comes in and he proposes in 1883 that they build a school in town named for Martin Luther. And then he starts looking around at the public schools. So when Nix is saying, let's build a brand new high school, Albrecht says, well, we're building ours. We shouldn't tax everybody to make them go to high school. There's not enough benefit for that. Nix pushes ahead and gets a building built. And then in the 1890s, this whole thing develops into the Great Culture War in New Ulm history. Albrecht is joined by Dr. O.C. Strickler, who is the son-in-law of George Daney, who is a mill owner. And then they are joined by Charles Silverson, who is the biggest mill owner in town. He's the wealthiest man in town. And he becomes interested in the school board. So 1892, there's this election for the school board, and the Lutherans and Catholics, at least according to the Turners, are offering free beer to come out and vote for their candidates. And even more interesting is they line up women to vote. And they said they marched to the opposition of the Turners complained the processions of women from Catholic and Lutheran churches on Sunday afternoon went and voted like so many hired creatures to do the will of the bosses. Well, they won the school board. 1894, they fire Robert Nix. So here was this star that gets the axe by these newcomers to town, by these Catholics and Lutherans and the wealthy mill owners. But the result was, what was the reason? Well, one person wrote, our children are now taught the national anthem as it was written, not leaving out the last verse because of the reference therein to the deity. In God is our trust. I bet you, how many of you remember the last verse of the Star Spangled Banner? But there is that, in God is our trust. And they had to sing that again in school. They said the blackboards are not now the bulletin boards for Sunday theaters, and the ideas of evolution have been dropped. Nix was teaching evolution. So he is fired. The battle goes on for several years, And eventually an informal agreement is reached that you'll have Lutheran representation, Catholic representation, and then the great unwashed out there, the Turner's Methodist Congregationalists. But that was the battle that took place, and very tense feeling. The Turner did this little set with O.C. Strickler, George Daney, and Charles Silverson, sort of Silvertooth, how you translate it, up there with the money bags, taking over the school board, with the sheep up above. This continues a few years later with the election of, this fellow, John Lind. 1896, he runs for governor. Now, in those days in Minnesota, the Republicans held on office, controlled the state government since the Civil War. And there were two big voting blocks of immigrants, the Swedes and the Germans. And you wanted to bring in those votes if you could. If you had a good Swedish candidate, it helped. Well, Lind had the perfect combination because he was from New Ulm, he knew German, and he was a Turner. So you have the Swede, born in Sweden, who is easy in German culture. And so he runs, he loses by only 3,000 votes. But as in all politics, you try to find a weakness in your opponent. And so the Republicans particularly attacked him as being a Turner member. If he's German, well, okay, but he's an atheist. He's an infidel. And it becomes, the charges made that John Lind is so infidel and sided with the infidels in the bitter fight against the Christians in his home city over the schools, which the church people won. And then down below, yes, he's a pronounced atheist. And because of this negative publicity, Lind loses in 1896. Well, he brought a suit against the St. Paul Dispatch that carried all of this. And it goes on. The first case he loses. This is A.F. Rhyme, who testifies, the good Lutheran professor up at Martin Luther, and says, Professor Nix taught evolution, and that he is considered that this is denying the existence of a supreme being. That's what Turners do. O.C. Strickler comes in and says that Lind supported Nix, who was considered an atheist, and he was a member of the Turner Society. The case, the libel case, turned on this fellow's testimony, Sam Peterson. Peterson, that's not a German name. He came to town, was a very successful agricultural implement salesman, and a very strong Republican. Lind breaks off from the Republican Party to run as an independent, and but they bring in as a defense of the newspaper. They bring in Sam Peterson to say, well, yeah, Lind is an atheist, and so the newspaper wasn't lying. The defense attorney, or the attorney for Lind, talks to Peterson, and he says, do you remember Lind's response to the death of your son 15 years ago, when Lind came and talked to you? And slowly Peterson responded in court and said, Lind had consoled him and told him that his son would continue in another life. It's not an atheist. And so that really turned, and Lind won that case. Anybody recognize Mr. Peterson's son? A beautiful monument out in the cemetery. So that's the story of where New Ulm was not a Turner town as much anymore. Now it had to contend with New Ulm multiculturalism, I guess you might say, with Lutherans and Catholics. And they had to learn different ways to handle things. 1901, they opened up a new magnificent Turner Hall. There's a great little clip of it when it burned that's up in the exhibit you can take a look at. And the main speaker at that time was Wilhelm Fender. old man. He would die a few years later. And he said in his address, he said, the Association of the Turners never tried to attack a good fellow or citizen or even mock him for holding different religious views. He derided the school board reformers as shameful, and then he said, that we have ever tried to fulfill these principles is shown by our turning school, our Sunday schools, our endeavors through lectures, through the cultivation of music and singing and dramatic efforts to work for the benefit of both mind and body, and in general, working with all our powers that mankind should advance. In some ways, it was his benediction on New Ulm as a Turner town. So what's the legacy? Summary. Is New Ulm still a Turner town? In many ways it is. It's still part of that dream that was out there. The main plat, it's still, when you drive through, it's a beautiful German town. Orderly, the wide streets, very walkable. The park, we have one of the best park systems in the state, far and away. It's a sound education system. The Turner Hall is still the center of much that goes on in the community. And there's a magnificent new gymnastics facility. And that's because of the Turner tradition that was here. The county courthouse is smack in the middle. The school has moved off. But the Turners, I think if they had come back, they would have gone, oh, there's a wonderful theater right there. That was part of who they were and what they wanted for the town. They would have been thrilled to know that the State Street Theater is there. If they looked down at Minnesota Street at the Grand Center for the Arts and Culture, they would have gone, oh, Philip Gross, of course, one of our Turners. He always used to love to hold dances and concerts and dramas up in the upper hall. So they wouldn't have been surprised to see the Grand Center for the Arts or the State Street Theater. If they had looked around and thought, well, we wanted to have good commerce and good business in town for people to make money, they would have looked at one of the founding Turners, August Schell, one of the first members of the New Ulm Turner line. And they would have gone, oh, of course, August always had a good business sense. And they would have been thrilled that his descendants were world-class gymnasts, as Ted Marney was. So they wouldn't have been surprised. Even Wanda God, another star here, they would have liked, because he was not a good Catholic. Anton was not. I looked at that. And Wanda was not either. In fact, the Shells took Anton God under their wing and gave him work and helped send him for training and education. So there is this wonderful, and what better things in town could you think of for a German town than Martin Luther College and Hermann up side by side up Center Street. These are two of the great German characters in history. And you know what? They were rebels. They stood up because they had a dream to shake up things and do things differently. By the way, the Turners would have been really thrilled that everything's open on Sundays now. So the lesson is what kind of town do you want? They asked us this from across generations, from across more than 150 years. They said, this is the town we want. This is how we're going to build this town. These are the things we're going to support and encourage. So we need to step back in our own time and go, what type of town do we want New Ulm to be? That's the tradition that we have in this town that was passed on from the Turners. And when you look again, who do we honor in this town? Hermann, Martin Luther. They were not guys who fit in. They stepped out and tried something different. Who else do we admire? John Lynn's house is open. He ran as we know it's a Turner, but also as an independent who was going to shake up the political system. We honored Wanda God, who went off and lived the bohemian life after she left town and never quite fit in, as most people describe, in the town itself. So we honored the dreamers, the people who stop and say, this is what life is all about, this is who we are. And just in a conclusion, I always think of George Bernard Shaw's words. He said, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were. I say, why not? And that's the tradition that Wilhelm Fender and the Turners brought to New Ulm. Dream your dreams. carry them out, risk your life for them. And we can do that even today. Thank you.